I had been a police officer for 10 years patrolling the streets of Jeffersonville, Indiana. My routine had become second nature. Start the shift with a quick briefing at the station, get updates on wanted suspects or recent crimes, and then head out in my cruiser. Some nights it was quiet, just a few traffic stops or the occasional noise complaint. Other nights, it was like every call came all at once and I'd be running around until sunrise. But I never imagined a night like the one I'm about to tell. Before I became a cop, I was convinced I'd make it in football. I was a decent running back in high school, and my coaches always said I had the speed and the determination. However, after a torn ACL during my senior year, my hopes for a scholarship died. I eventually found my way into the police academy, figuring I could use the discipline I'd honed on the field. Over the years, I learned to love the job, helping people and feeling like I was doing something good for my community. But by 2016, after a decade on the force, it started to wear on me. That summer, we got word about a string of robberies in the Clarksville area. The suspect's name was Robert Harrington. Medium build, dark hair, known for driving a black sedan. He'd been elusive for weeks, always seeming to slip away. Just as backup arrived on the night in question, I was in my cruiser near East 10th Street, not far from Walnut Ridge Cemetery. It was past midnight, and the roads were nearly empty except for a stray car or two. I remember noticing a black sedan moving slowly ahead of me, as if the driver was unsure of where he was going. The moment he spotted my police car, though, he hit the gas. My instincts kicked in, and I flipped on the lights. He pulled over briefly, so I parked behind him and approached on foot. When I got to the window, the driver was visibly tense. I asked for his license and registration. He hesitated before handing over his ID. Sure enough, it read Harrington. My mind flashed back to the morning briefing. This was the guy. Same name, same description. It did unhelp that his hand was trembling on the steering wheel. I calmly asked him to step out of the vehicle. He refused at first, muttering that I had the wrong person. I didn't want to spook him, but as soon as I reached my radio to call for backup, he floored the accelerator and took off. I sprinted back to my cruiser, adrenaline shooting through my veins, and started the pursuit. He led me down a dark side street away from the main roads. I radioed in, requesting backup and giving my location. The street dead-ended near Walnut Ridge Cemetery, an old place with large iron gates and tall trees that cast strange shadows. Even in the faint glow of the streetlights, Harrington's black car almost vanished in the darkness. It was tough to keep track of him when I rounded the final bend. I expected to see his taillights or the silhouette of his car, but the road was completely empty. I slowed to a crawl, scanning left and right, my palms sweaty on the steering wheel, even with my spotlight on. I could unsee any sign of movement. Finally, I decided to stop, hoping my backup would arrive soon. Out of my cruiser, gun drawn, and carefully approached the cemetery. Gates, the silence was unnerving. No distant traffic, no crickets, nothing. As I moved closer to the fence, my heart pounded in my ears. Then out of the corner of my eye, I saw headlights, a black car for a second. I thought it was Harrington doubling back. I aimed my weapon and shouted for the driver to stop. When the sedan came to a halt, a terrified man and a woman stared back at me, their faces lit by my flashlight. They were just a couple, returning from a late night dinner. I asked if they'd seen another black car or anyone running around. They looked at me like I was crazy. They had seen a thing apologizing for the scare. I let them go. I continued checking the area, then noticed another black car partially hidden behind some overgrown bushes. My pulse kicked up again. I inched closer, using my flashlight to peer through the windows. The driver's seat was empty, the door slightly ajar. That's when I spotted movement inside the cemetery grounds, a shape someone dressed in dark clothing slipped between the headstones, flashlight shaking a bit. I passed through the iron gate, trying to keep my footsteps quiet. Tombstones jutted out from the darkness, and every step felt heavier than the last. My radio crackled as dispatch confirmed backup was en route, but still a few minutes away. Those minutes felt endless. I swept my light behind each grave, adrenaline surging every time I thought I saw movement. Suddenly I heard a distinct crunch of gravel behind a large monument. I spun, and for a moment I froze. 3 figures in black clothing stood there, each one staring at me. They were UN ghosts or anything supernatural. They were real people, and my gut told me they were armed. My heart was pounding so hard that I almost thought I could hear it echo. Then Robert Harrington appeared from behind them. My mind raced for against. One of my backup was still out of sight. One of them shouted at me to drop my weapon. I did. Unhesitate, I set it on the ground and raised my hands. They rushed me, pinned my arms back, and forced me onto my knees. I could feel the cold, damp earth through my pants. The smell of wet grass and ancient stone was overwhelming. I remembered them whispering to each other, trying to decide what to do with me. I tried to keep calm. But I was terrified. Every second felt drawn out like I was living in slow motion a few minutes later.
I heard footsteps, more of them, this time from behind the line of graves.
I braced myself, thinking more of their gang had arrived. But then I heard a voice yell, "Hands up, police my backup." Finally made it red and blue, lights flashed across the tombstones, and within seconds officers were all around the men, scattered. But it was too late. They were tackled and disarmed. One by one, I was untied, breathless and shaking as my fellow officers led the suspects to waiting squad cars. They found evidence later that these guys had been using one of the old mausoleums for stashing stolen goods. And there were even open graves they used as hiding spots. The entire thing felt surreal, like a nightmare I could unwake from after that night. I started questioning everything. I'd seen my fair share of danger. But something about being outnumbered alone in that dark cemetery pushed me over the edge. I realized how thin the line was between my routine and utter chaos. A few weeks later, I turned in my resignation. I just could see myself going back to those silent streets, waiting for the next close call. My name is Avery Hamilton, and I was 17 when this happened. I've lived in Bloomington, Minnesota most of my life. My parents have a small 2-story home on a quiet street, not too far from Jefferson High School, where I am a junior. Classes were in full swing, and finals were just around the corner. If you've ever been through a exam season, you know how the stress can eat at you day and night. At least that's how it felt for me. It all started on it Thursday afternoon. I came home from school feeling anxious because my history exam was the next day, and I had UNT studied enough. To make matters worse, my parents were packing to leave for my cousin Kevin S. wedding in Mono, about an hour and a half south of us. They'd be gone until Monday, which meant I'd be on my own for the first time. I helped my mom load suitcases into the trunk of our SUV. Then double-checked that she had forgotten anything. She could tell I was uneasy. She hugged me and said to call right away. If anything felt wrong, I nodded, trying to look confident. But deep inside, my nerves were already frayed. She and my dad pulled out of the driveway at around 6:00 p.m., leaving the house strangely silent. I walked back inside and locked the door. Usually, I appreciate peace, especially when I need to study, but this time, something about the empty house made me uneasy. The absence of my parents' voices and the hum of their routine was unsettling. Every small noise seemed to amplify, the faint ticking of the clock in the living room, the hum of the refrigerator, to take my mind off it. I decided to watch some TV. It helps, but I still felt on edge. After about an hour, I grabbed my phone and texted my friend Melissa, a classmate of mine. We both had the same history exam coming up. I asked if she could spend the night so we could study together. She agreed, saying she'll be over by 9:00 p.m. When Melissa arrived, the house felt a little more normal. We spread our textbooks across the living room coffee table and started reviewing chapters around 10 p.m. She said she needed to use the bathroom. I told her to head upstairs to my room because there was an attached bathroom. There it is, usually cleaner and has fresh towels. My mom insists on keeping it spotless. Not even 2 minutes later, Melissa came back downstairs looking pale. She claimed she saw someone sitting in our backyard, right in one of the chairs on the deck at first. I thought maybe she was mistaking a shadow or something, but she insisted she saw the outline of a person. My heart pounded, but I tried to stay calm. We both went upstairs to my bedroom window to check. I peered into the backyard, scanning it carefully. The overhead porch light was dim, but I didn't see anyone. The chair was empty and everything was still. I suggested maybe her eyes were playing tricks on her. She didn't push back too much, but she seemed uneasy. The rest of the night passed without incident. Melissa eventually fell asleep in my room, and by morning we laughed it off as nerves. She went home later that day, and I settled back into studying. Fast forward 2 nights later. It was Saturday, raining hard around 10 p.m. and Melissa could come over because her dad was in the hospital for a minor procedure. She had to stay home with her younger siblings, so it was just me in the house again, with the rain pounding against the windows and the wind rattling the back fence. My nerves spiked. I tried to focus on my notes, but that uneasy feeling was creeping back in. Then I heard a faint squeaking sound, like someone shifting in a wooden chair on the deck. I froze. The sound came again, this time more distinct. Slowly, I crept upstairs, flicking off lights so I would be seen from outside of my bedroom window. I gently parted the curtains. The porch light cast a dull glow over the backyard, illuminating just enough to see the silhouette of a man sitting in the same deck chair. Melissa had mentioned my heart was pounding so hard. I was afraid he might hear it at one point. He turned his head toward my window. I couldn't make out his face, but the idea that he might be looking directly at me was terrifying. I fumbled for my phone, ready to call someone, my parents, the police. Anyone. When I heard a sudden loud knock at the front door, my stomach dropped. Part of me thought it might be him trying to lure me out. By pretending to be someone else, then I heard a muffled voice announcing police. Another voice followed this time. I recognized it as my neighbor, Mrs. Carlson. She lived next door for years, and my mom had asked her to keep an eye on me. While they were gone, I cautiously went downstairs through the peephole. I saw Mrs. Carlson and an officer standing on my porch. I let him in, practically shaking. Mrs. Carlson explained that she'd been tidying up in her attic, which has a small window that overlooks my backyard, and she noticed a man sitting on my deck. She said she immediately called the police. But by the time the patrol car arrived, he was gone. They searched around the property and found no sign of him. The officer was polite, but told me to stay somewhere else for the night if I could with my parents gone. Mrs. Carlson insisted I pack a bag and sleep at her place for the rest of the weekend. I barely argued, too rattled to think straight before I left. I took a quick nervous look out the back door, half expecting to see that shadowy figure again. But all I saw was the empty chair wet with rain that night. I lay awake in Mrs. Carlson's guest room, still frightened. My parents came back on Monday, and I never spent another night alone. Until I left for college. Even though nothing physically happened to me, the fear I felt was real. Before we dive into the next story, if you're revisiting our channel for the first time, do you and Tay forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on the bell icon to stay updated with our upcoming scary stories. Your support means the world to us, so please share these stories with your friends and family. Thanks. I just wrapped up a brutal business meeting in Cleveland, Ohio, one of those high-stakes negotiations where every word could cost you a contract. The whole thing left me drained and tense. I had you and slept in days, rather than push all the way back to Indianapolis that night. I decided to find a motel somewhere along the route. I booked a small roadside place, figuring ID, catch some rest, and start fresh in the morning. The motel was nothing special, a low single-story building with a flickering neon sign. My room had the basics, a bed, a TV, a bathroom that smelled faintly of bleach. Still, it felt like a relief. I changed into a t-shirt and sweatpants, trying to forget the stress of that meeting. My phone buzzed with follow-up emails from my boss, but I ignored them for once and tried to settle in at around 1 o'clock a.m. I heard a muffled sound outside my door. At first I thought it might be rowdy guests or someone arguing, but then the noise got clearer. It was a woman's scream. It was loud and frantic, the kind of scream you associate with real fear. I hesitated for a moment, my heart pounding. I opened the door or called the front desk. Before I could decide, her screams turned into words. She was yelling something about her husband being attacked that jolted me into action. I cracked my door open to see a woman in a bathrobe, tears streaming down her face. She looked at me and pleaded for help, rambling that a motel worker had attacked her husband and even killed him. I froze. The word killed rang in my ears. I stepped into the hallway and asked where her husband was. She pointed to her room, a few doors down, saying his body was there. I was freaked out, but I followed her, half out of concern, half out of shock. When we reached her room, I saw a man lying on the floor, motionless. I am no doctor, but he looked bad. The police arrived not long after. Somebody else must have called, or maybe the night manager. They quickly ushered me out into the hallway while they examined the scene. The woman kept crying, saying a man who worked at the motel had tricked them into opening the door and then attacked her husband. She claimed she recognized him from earlier in the day when she was checking in. She said he'd been mopping the floors, lurking around when an officer asked how this supposed worker got into a locked room. She looked confused, she mumbled. Something about him saying there was a problem with the room, a missing part, or a repair. Her husband opened the door, and then the attacker lunged. The story felt patchy, like she was making it up on the spot. The police asked the motel manager to round up all the employees for questioning. A handful of people showed up, housekeepers, a maintenance guy, the clerk, but the woman insisted the attacker was among them. The manager calmly said these were all the staff on duty and nobody else. I noticed the officers exchanged skeptical looks. They decided to check the CCTV footage in the manager's office. That S, when the woman got really anxious, kept saying the attacker could be escaping right now, that the police needed to start searching the grounds. The cops ignored her and pulled up the security feed anyway. I was on it in the office, so I didn't see what they found in real time, but I heard about it afterward. The footage showed the woman leaving her room earlier, wearing some sort of mask and walking around the parking lot carefully, almost like she was stalking someone. Then she went back into her room, and a few minutes later she emerged screaming. There was no sign of a mysterious employee, no knocking at her door, no one else going inside. She got arrested on the spot for suspicion of murder. Apparently there were enough signs pointing to her involvement in her husband's death, plus the contradictory story about a motel worker that did UNT match the video. The police cordoned off the area and overheard them saying something about searching for a weapon in the room. I didn't stick around to see what happened next. I had zero desire to spend another moment in that motel, especially with cops and crime scene tape all around. I packed my bag in a hurry, checked out with the blur-eyed clerk, and drove off into the night. I did uncare that it was nearly 3 a.m. It was safer than staying put. Now I coing pieced together all the details. Was she planning this all along? Did something happen between them that escalated into violence? And why create a story about a random motel worker? All I know is I barely slept for days. After that, my mind kept replaying the scene, the woman's frantic screaming, the lifeless body on the floor, and the cops shaking their heads at the CCTV footage. The motel was supposed to be a quick pit stop on my long drive back from a stressful meeting, but it turned into a whole different kind of nightmare. I never heard any follow-up in the news, probably because I was too scared to even look for it. Part of me wonders if there was more to the story than the police.
Led on either way. I have units stayed in a rundown roadside
motel since, and I do. On Plane 2, my name is Jonathan Martin. You may know me as a former offensive tackle from the Miami Dolphins back in the early 2010s. It was always my dream to play in the NFL. Sadly, a few jerk-offs ruined that dream for me. I got drafted by the Dolphins in April of 2012 and started training camp in July. I was, and still am, a very shy and introverted person. And I didn't expect to befriend everyone on the team right away. I met every player on the team, including the coaching staff. And it was no problem at first. The second week of training camp then came, and that's when the hazing had started. The first hazing ritual I did was carrying veterans' bags and paying for team dinners. I didn't take offense to this as I had done this before. When I was a freshman on the football team in high school and college, I also knew that I wasn't the only one who had to go through this. The hazing would carry on within the next few weeks. Almost the whole team would make fun of me. But 3 guys on the team would take the hazing to a further level. Their names were Mike, John, and Richie. They would insult me by calling me names like Big Weirdo and Soft because of my quiet personality, and they would throw racial slurs at me. But it was primarily from Richie. I took this a little more personally than having to carry bags and pay for dinner. This had hit home more. I was a victim of racial abuse growing up. So this wasn't the first time someone would call me slurs. They would also mock my intelligence and say I wasn't cut for the NFL, and I should be a scientist instead. They would say these things because I went to college at Stanford. I would initially try to laugh it off, and would even play along at times as I wanted to fit in. During the 10th week of training, Richie left me a racist voicemail that said, "Hey, what's up, you half? Piece of I saw you on Twitter. You have been training for 10 weeks. I'm going to kill you. I'll slap your mother across the face." This voicemail hit harder than an embryo's kick to a pregnant woman's stomach. Richie was now targeting my family, which he had never met before. Why was he doing this? What is this dude's deal? Why just me? Was it because I was more quieter and introverted than all the others, which made me stand out in a locker room that valued toughness and bravado? A lot of other black people were on the team, but none were a victim of racial abuse. Like me, it was now early in the 2012 season. And this is where the harassment got worse one time. I was pressured to pay thousands of dollars for team events, including a $15,000 Las Vegas trip that I did uneven attend. This was not a standard rookie dinner, but an excessive financial demand that I felt forced to comply with. Other rookies would often cover some veteran expenses, but the demands on me were more excessive and targeted. This financial harassment became a pattern, making me feel even more isolated at one point. I was so mentally exhausted by the treatment I endured that I texted his parents saying I hated here. This atmosphere is like a prison. My parents suggested that I should report this, but I was too afraid to do so because I didn't want to be seen as weak and a hyper-masculine. NFL culture. The Miami Dolphins organization is also known as a tough guy culture, though I never spoke publicly in 2012 about all the bullying I suffered. It took a very great toll on my mental health. I wish I could tell you that it ends here, but sadly it doesn't. And the bullying continued throughout the 2013 NFL season. In October of 2013, I had a breaking point one day. I sat down at a table for lunch with Richie and my teammates, but as soon as I sat down, everyone stood up and left as a joke. This was a prank that had been used on rookies before, but for me, it was the final straw. I left the Team S facility that day and never returned after leaving the team. I checked into a mental facility to deal with the depression and anxiety I suffered from the past 2 years of being on that team. I spoke with my parents and close confidants who encouraged me to tell my story. I couldn't have agreed with them more. It was just too much for me. I spoke publicly about this and after released a statement, the NFL launched an investigation. The reports all confirm that I have been subjected to persistent bullying and harassment by the Miami Dolphins, but mostly from Richie. After the investigation concluded, Richie was suspended for the whole 2013 season and was later released by the team. Although the punishment against Richie did satisfy me, my mental health remained the same in the 2014 NFL season.
One was now on the San Francisco 49ers.
I played 15 games that season, but my confidence was at an all-time low. I would always feel isolated, and I would struggle with my mental health, making it difficult to perform at a high level. 1. Retired from football in 2015. In my retirement statement, I admitted that my NFL career's emotional and mental toll was overwhelming in 2016. 2017, I was an advocate for mental health awareness and anti-bullying initiatives. I was helping other people who had been suffering from bullying. In May of 2024, I graduated from the University of Pennsylvania with an MBA in finance and real estate. I also am a co-founder of the Narrow Road Group, which is a real estate platform. After accomplishing these things, I am now happier than I have ever been before. I might be loving my life right now. I will always have demons inside me from my NFL experience. For those of you who are being bullied, you need to speak up. If you do UNT, then the bullying will continue. And it could lead to you doing very evil things in life. You may feel alone, but you are never alone, and someone will always be there to help you. This all happened not long after my roommate Javi and I moved into a cramped apartment in Queens. One of those places that feels more like a walk-in closet than a home. There were boxes everywhere. The floor creaked like an old rocking chair. Whenever we shifted our weight, and the living room window looked out onto an alley filled with garbage cans and broken pallets. But hey, it was ours. The problem was the lighting. Our new shoebox had no overhead fixtures. None at night. The corners disappeared in inky blackness, and the single floor lamp we inherited from a friend was so dim, it barely illuminated the space around the couch. I work night shifts at a coffee shop, which means I am usually wide awake when the rest of the city is winding down. If I wanted to read, pay bills, or even find my socks without fumbling, I needed something bright that would uncost half my paycheck. Given that minimum wage doesn't stretch far in New York, I turned to the one place everyone goes when they re-broke and desperate: Craigslist. I spent hours scrolling through listings for lamps. Most were ugly brass antiques or dented plastic monstrosities from the 70s. Then I found a sleek modern lamp that looked like it came straight from a designer showroom. The photo showed a smooth metal neck, a subdued golden glow, and a marble base that seemed solid enough to take a hit from a sledgehammer. Whoever owned it had paid real money once, but the listing price was a mere $20. The seller's username was just a random string of letters and numbers. No ratings, no biography, nothing. Javi glanced at the ad over my shoulder, scratched his chin, and shot me a look that screamed, "We might get murdered." I shrugged. Weedy. Both just paid rent. And desperation can make a bad idea look like a solid plan. The seller insisted on meeting in Brooklyn near the Navy Yard. It was a late afternoon in early spring when I drove over the sky tinged gray by the promise of rain. My GPS took me past crumbling warehouses and lots strewn with rusted scraps. The air had attempts of burned rubber and something else, maybe industrial chemicals or stale river water. I didn't see a single soul on the streets except for a stray dog sniffing around a garbage bag as though hoping to find dinner. A pack of crows flapped overhead call like they knew something I did, and finally I arrived at the address, a decrepit brick building, 3 stories tall, with a faded sign that read Acme Tool. And the letters were peeling off and the windows on the upper levels were cracked or boarded up. Honestly, the place looked abandoned. The front door led into a dimly lit lobby. I turned on the flashlight on my phone, swallowing hard. "Hello," I called, my voice echoing in the emptiness. "I am here for the lamp." No answer. For a moment I considered leaving $20 or not. The whole setup screamed danger. But then I heard footsteps on the stairs. A figure in a gray hoodie materialized. Above me, his face shadowed. In the flickering overhead light, he did unsmile. He just nodded and jerked his head in the direction of a hallway. As if to say, "Follow me." My heart hammered like it was trying to escape my chest.
but
I followed my sneakers, crunched on bits of broken glass that glittered under the phone. Glare, he led me to what looked like a supply closet filled with random junk and a metal shelving unit covered in dusty boxers, and there, just as promised, stood the lamp. I remember feeling a wave of relief. It was identical to the Craigslist photo, sleek, modern, flawless, the kind of lamp that usually costs a couple $100. Easy! I pulled out my wallet, forcing a laugh that sounded more nervous than casual. Are you sure? 20S. Okay, this lamp must be worth a lot more before I could finish. I heard a harsh clang, the world went sideways, my mind blanked. Then I felt a sharp, dizzying impact on my temple, and everything dissolved into blackness. Coming to was like swimming upward through thick ink. My head throbbed, and a nauseating wave of pain pulsed behind my eyes, the floor beneath. Me felt rough and cold, like unfinished concrete. Somewhere nearby, two voices argued in hushed, urgent tones. The wallet's SMT. Check his phone. That jolted me. Awake, my phone, my wallet gone. I tried to stir, but my limbs felt like they were made of lead before I could do anything. There was a sudden commotion. From outside the room, NYPD hands. Where I can see him, the voices near me erupted in curses. Then came a rush of footsteps, grunts, and bodies slamming against walls. A bright flashlight cut through the darkness, landing on my face. I squinted. A cop knelt, and her voice was surprisingly gentle as she told me, "Yuri, okay? We've got an ambulance on the way?" They took me to the hospital, where I discovered that the men who de-attacked me were part of a robbery scam. They used fake Craigslist ads to lure in buyers, then stole whatever they could: money, credit cards, phones. Sometimes they resell the goods, sometimes they vanish entirely. The police had been surveilling the area after getting a tip about similar incidents in Jersey. The timing was sheer luck. If the cops had UNC shown up, who knows what might have happened. An officer visited me while I was lying in a curtained-off bed, an ice pack pressed to my temple. He returned my wallet and phone, explaining they'd been found on one of the suspects. Then he handed me a plastic evidence bag, and inside it was a lamp. We were holding onto it for a bit, but once we clear it, you can take it, he said. Almost apologetically, might as well get something out of this mess, right? A few days later, bruised and bandaged, I hobbled back into our Queens apartment. Javi predictably pounced on the lamp like a cat on a favorite toy. "Dude, we are keeping this. It has practically a trophy," he said, turning it on to check the glow and free lighting. "Best Craigslist deal ever." The lamp worked, perfectly casting a warm, comfortable light that made our dingy living room feel downright cozy. I would have been thrilled if not for the nagging memory of the attack. Every time I looked at it, I remembered the warehouse, the hoodie guy, the flash of pain. This happened last summer. My two friends, Mark and Jason, and I decided to do a 3-night camping trip in a state park a few hours from where we live. It was zoomed at one of those family-friendly campgrounds with paved lots and bathrooms. This was deep woods, primitive sites, no cell signal, just a fire ring and whatever you brought with. The first night was exactly what you'd expect. We got there late afternoon, set up our tents, gathered some firewood, and just chilled. Typical camping stuff. Nothing weird. The second day was more of the same. We hiked, fished a little, explored around there. Was no one else out there? At least as far as we could tell, that was part of the appeal, just us and miles of woods. But that night, something felt off. We were sitting around the fire again, not even late, maybe 9:30 or 10 mark. Was mid-sentence when Jason suddenly stopped him and said, "Did you hear that?" We all went quiet at first. I didn't hear anything. Then faintly there was this snapping sound, like someone stepping on a beer ranch, not uncommon in the woods, obviously. But it did unfit. The rhythm was wrong. It was Una like an animal scurrying around. It was spaced out. Step Mark tried to brush it off, saying it was probably a deer, but none of us bought it. We sat there listening to fire crack softly, and that S when I noticed the woods were dead silent. No crickets, no wind, nothing. Eventually, we heard nothing else, and we forced ourselves to laugh it off. Even though none of us felt like laughing, we turned in not long after that. Now here, that's where it gets worse. On the third night, we could unshake the weird vibe. It was like this low-grade tension all day. We didn't talk about it, but you could feel it that night. We built the fire bigger, like it would somehow keep whatever that was away around midnight. I woke up at first, I didn't know. I was just suddenly awake, heart pounding. I lay there listening, trying to figure out what had pulled me out of sleep. Then I heard it crunch paws, crunch footsteps, not close, but not far either, just beyond where the firelight would have reached. If it were still burning, slow, deliberate steps, not the random rustle of an animal, someone walking. I stayed frozen, holding my breath, trying to convince myself it was nothing. But it kept going, a few steps. Then silence, then more steps, circling the tents. I could hear Mark's breathing change in the tent next to mine. He was awake. I wanted to whisper to say something, but I was too scared to even move. The steps got closer. I thought about unzipping my tent to look out, but the idea of someone or something standing there in the dark just outside made my chest tighten. I had this image in my head of a face staring back at me inches away, then the footsteps stopped. I waited, straining to hear anything, but it was just dead silent again. I don't know how long. I lay there, maybe an hour, maybe more. Eventually, exhaustion won. And I must have drifted off when I woke up. The sun was coming through the thin nylon of my tent. For a few seconds, I thought maybe I dreamed it. But when I got out, I saw Mark and Jason were already up, both looking like they hadn't slept at all. We didn't say much, just packed up our stuff in record time. As we were taking down the tents, Jason stopped and pointed at the ground. Footprints, not ours! They circled our tents, clear as day, deep impressions in the dirt. Barefoot! Who the hell walks barefoot in the woods in the middle of the night? We hiked back to the car without saying much. None of us wanted to admit how freaked out we were. I've been a security guard for about 5 years. Now it's not as exciting as people think. No high-speed chases, no epic confrontations, mostly just long hours of walking. Empty hallways, staring at security monitors, and trying to keep me awake. But there was this one night that I'll never forget. I still think about it sometimes when I'm alone and it makes my skin crawl. It was a Friday night shift at this mid-sized office building downtown, you know the type. Glass entrance, a couple of floors with cubicles, some conference rooms, break areas, that sort of thing. The company that leased the space was some tech startup. Most people cleared out by 6 o'clock p.m., but there was always the occasional workaholic burning the midnight oil that night. It was quiet. Just me, my usual rounds, and the faint hum of fluorescent lights around 11:30 p.m. I was in the control room, feet up on the desk, sipping lukewarm coffee, half watching the grainy security feeds that S when I noticed something odd on one of the exterior cameras. A man was standing just outside the main entrance. He was undoing anything, just standing there about 10 feet from the door, not moving. His face was partially hidden under a hoodie. Hands were buried in his jacket pockets at first. I thought maybe he was waiting for someone. An Uber or a coworker still inside, but minutes passed and he didn't budge. Just standing there staring straight ahead. I watched him for a bit longer, trying to rationalize. And maybe he was just taking a smoke break? Though did anyone see any cigarette? I switched 2 different camera angles to see if I could get a better look. But it didn't help much. He was just there motionless. Something felt off after about 10 minutes of this. I decided to do a quick walk downstairs to see if he needed help or to tell him to move along if he was loitering. As I walked toward the lobby, I kept glancing at the monitors from the other cameras. He had UNN moved an inch. When I got to the glass doors, I could see him now, standing under the dim glow of the streetlight. His face was still shadowed, but there was this weird vibe about him. You know how sometimes you just feel when someone nods, right? Like your brain picks up on something subtle that you couldn't quite explain. I opened the door, just a crack enough to talk through you. Good, are you waiting for someone? No response. He did uneven flinch. Just kept standing there staring not at me but at the building. His eyes were dark and sunken like he had eaten slept in days. I felt this tightness in my chest, like my body was reacting before my brain could process why. Hey, I said again, louder this time. Nothing I did want to step outside. Something told me not to. Instead, I locked the door, backed away slowly, and went straight back to the control room. When I checked the monitors again, he was gone. No sign of him anywhere. I flipped through every camera, nothing there. No way. He could have moved that fast without being caught on at least one other angle. I even checked the parking lot feed. Empty. That should have been the end of it. Just some weird dude, right? But about 30 minutes later, around midnight, I saw something else on one of the upper floor cameras. There was movement. The office should have been empty. Everyone clocks out early on Fridays. But there was a figure walking down the hallway. My first thought was maybe someone stayed late without signing out, which was unheard of. But then I realized it was him. Same hoodie, same slouched posture. But how the hell did he get? When the doors were locked, I locked them. I stared at the monitor, my heart pounding now. It was unmoving, like someone who belonged there. No rush, no hesitation, just slow, deliberate steps like he knew exactly where he was going. I grabbed my flashlight and radio. Not that the radio would have helped much. I was the only guard on duty. My mind raced through the possibilities. Maybe he was an employee I did unrecognize. Maybe I missed him. In my last round, I took the stairs 2 at a time, trying to stay quiet. When I reached the floor where I'd seen him, the hallway was empty. I could hear the faint hum of office equipment and the buzz of vending machines down the hall. But no footsteps, no sound of doors opening or closing. I checked every office, every break room, nothing. Then I saw at a side door near the emergency exit, slightly ajar. That door had an alarm. If opened without a key card, But there'd been no alert. I stepped closer, pushing it open with the end of my flashlight. The stairwell beyond was empty but taped to the wall. Just beside the door was a small strip of black electrical tape covering the door latch. That's how we got in, kept the door from locking shut, probably slipped in. Well, I was distracted by him outside at that point. I was on trying to be a hero. I called the cops, they showed up fast and cleared the building with me. But he was gone, just vanished, no sign of forced entry. And nothing was stolen. The only weird thing they found was a set of footprints leading to the maintenance room, a place with no cameras inside. But he wasn't there. The cop said he was probably a squatter or someone trying to steal equipment. Maybe, but that didn't explain how he knew exactly where to go, how to avoid most of the cameras, or why he was just standing outside for so long like he was waiting for something or someone the building installed. Better security after that, more cameras, stricter protocols. But I still think about that guy, sometimes wondered what he was doing there, wonder if he was waiting for me to come outside.